Well, I am rather busy.
Now he's going to move like right along to McGregor. That's his whole life. You know.
This was a week where I think we had 2 bad episodes, but I really enjoyed both of them. Like,
I kind of agree with you, actually. Yeah.
Excelsis Dei, more so than the other, made no goddamn sense. Had no idea what it was about. But again, I had fun with both of these episodes. This is, I think we are. Episodes like 3 were just horrible. Were just unwatchable. But I think this is getting to a point where even a not great episode of The X-Files is still really good because, as you've said, you get Mulder and Scully bouncing off of each other. It's comfortable. It's fun. We're checking in with people that we like and enjoy hanging out with, and they're solving a spooky mystery like that.
Right.
I've said this several times. Like, it was Saturday night and it creeped me out a little bit. So that's really all I wanted from it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy to hear that because I was hoping that was going to happen for you. I think that, certainly in the first season of The X-Files, you did not have that reaction to some episodes that could be these kind of episodes that we have this week. And this is really the charm of the show that even though these episodes aren't bad necessarily.
No.
I mean, I don't think that
they
unwatchable.
weren't boring.
They're entertaining. They move along at a nice clip. I think that they make some questionable choices, which we'll talk about, but overall, the plots of these episodes don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. I think Excelsis Dei more than Aubrey. Well, actually, I'll take that back. I think they're both kind of incomprehensible. But
I guess to start with Excelsis Dei, number one, thematically, I don't think the episode knows what it was about. It starts off as this gender roles are changing and, more awareness of sexual assault in people and shitty reactions that people have to victims and things like that. It seems like it's going to be an episode about that, but then it turns into an episode about elder abuse and, in Asia we respect our elders and that kind of stuff. And then on a plot level, I couldn't tell if it was ghosts, if it was a new drug that fixed Alzheimer's, or whether it was hallucinogenic mushrooms. I don't know what exactly happened in this episode, but I'm not necessarily sure if I care, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think it does matter. I mean, I certainly agree with you that I think that this episode had about 3 different directions it could have gone in, and maybe would have been a better episode if it had committed to one of them.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Sometimes life is messy, and if this episode of The X-Files wants to show the messiness of life, then I'm fine with that. I do kind of wonder though about, because I look at this and I say, okay, look at an episode like Shapes, which also had a lot of the same issues as Excelsis Dei, right? Like, it was messy. It kind of went in different directions. It was about 4 different things. It also had this objectionable ethnic subplot, let's say, with the Native American stuff in Shapes, and in this episode with I think they say he's Malaysian, but it's generic Asian mysticism because that's what America thinks all Asian people are like, I guess. But it starts let's start at the beginning with this entity rape. And that's the part of it that always kind of gets me, because Mulder and Scully kind of reverse roles in this episode. Scully is the one who is very insistent that this is a real thing that happened, and Mulder's like, I don't know. Entity rape is not a very well-documented phenomenon, which is hilarious that he says it like that. We are talking about The X-Files after all. But it's the case where the show is telling us that she was actually assaulted and raped, but it doesn't ever seem that interested in that plot, and it drops it very quickly to get us to this other place about elder abuse, and I don't know, it doesn't seem to really grapple with that in any way.
I would say the elder abuse part I thought was hilarious because, I mean, this show doesn't.
Yes, I agree. Elder abuse is very hilarious.
No. I guess what I mean is the show doesn't actually show any elder abuse, and I mean, the worst we see, the one guy who's like, I'm just making $5 an hour. If you're not going to take your clothes off for a bath, I don't care. And he's making the old lady eat. And the food,
right.
I would say, we see a shot of the food. It looks very plain, but she is also a woman in her 80s. It's like ham, peas, and eggs and stuff. It looks nourishing enough, right? And he gets...
Yeah, you don't really want to give the old people sriracha.
Yeah, I mean, they don't, he doesn't seem the warmest, fuzziest, friendliest guy. Yes, the facilities are in disrepair and have these creepy basements and all of that. I mean, there are some legitimate problems here, but I'm not sure if it goes as far as elder abuse as the episode seems to need it. And it almost feels like the episode isn't comfortable going as dark as it may need to.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that in general, the elder abuse in this episode is obviously psychological and not physical.
And again, there is a lot to be said about a nursing home and the loss of dignity. And, nobody is comfortable with you have bad Alzheimer's. Do you stay at home with your family who may not be able to give you the proper care? Do you go to a facility where you can be looked after properly, but you won't have necessarily the loving comfort that you would? Again, it's not an easy situation, and I think it is very interesting that they made an episode hinging around that and around the fucked up feelings that go around it.
Yeah, and I don't want to move aside from the elder abuse stuff yet, but I also think that there's a questionable or problematic interpretation of the actions of the Malaysian orderly in this episode, because he is spouting the standard things about I'm using the term Asian very deliberately because that's what the understanding of this that's what the understanding of the cultures of Asia are in this episode. They are generic Asian. That he is a stand-in for all of the ideas about Asian cultures, that they respect their elders and they all live together in the same house 3 and 4 generations and they all take care of each other and blah blah blah, right? But at the same time, he is giving the residents of Excelsis Dei this drug he's making from mushrooms, indicating that perhaps the vaunted Asian respect for their elders has more to do with the fact that they don't get Alzheimer's because they have this secret mushroom. And if they had to deal with Alzheimer's patients in the same way that Westerners do, like maybe they wouldn't respect their elders as much. And it's just like, it's not something that the episode seems to realize is an interpretation that you could make of this episode. And it's also very, very weird.
And let me put it this way. This guy genuinely seems to have sympathies for the aged in American society. He genuinely seems to want to care for them. So for pennies, he could be selling these mushrooms to more people, distributing them out, even doing them for free out of the goodness of his heart and helping more people. Like, it's the typical thing about if in Malaysia there are these magic mushrooms that take care of aging, this would be sold everywhere around the world if this really worked this well. I mean, right. Maybe it's a little churlish to point out that plot hole, but...
Well, because they do realize that it is a plot hole or it's a problem that people are going to have with this episode, because they do have at the very end the Scully voiceover where she's saying, at the current time, there are no plans to investigate the mushrooms. And you're like, what? Why?
Government cover-up.
The guy apparently has a secret cure for Alzheimer's. Yeah. Why wouldn't you study this? It seems bizarre to me. But
yeah.
Well, let's talk about the nurse a little bit more, because I think that there's a weird blaming the victim part of this episode as well, which I find very, very objectionable. I mean, we see her at the beginning of the episode. She's competent. She's not taking any of the other orderly shit. Who they're not doing their work. They're just sitting there watching the fight. But then she gets cast into this sort of like emasculating woman role very early on, because she's telling the old men they can't watch TV anymore, and she's strapping one of them in. Why is she doing that? It's not explained, and I guess because maybe he gets up in the middle of the night. I don't know.
She does that after he pinches her ass, though. In a way, it's a fine. You're gonna get handsy. I'm gonna strap you down. Is the
I don't know. I don't know if that's a really good efficacy tactic for that or not.
Well,
But
now we talk about elder abuse again, but
well, right, exactly, and that's kind of where I'm getting at. Is that there are some indications that perhaps I don't know if this rises to the level of abuse necessarily, but it certainly is not great. And then she gets raped by a ghost. So what are we supposed to make of this?
well, I think the episode is at least aware of this, and I think Scully's reactions, and maybe this is the kind of thing where this is Gillian Anderson, putting her own thoughts into it that wasn't on the page, but, I'm thinking about the scene where the director is saying, well, let me show you her file. She complained about this, and she wanted leave for this and stuff. So, with the strong implication that she's making up this assault in order to get something, and you can tell from Scully's reaction, she thinks this is complete bullshit because, no matter what, this woman had bruises on her face. This woman had injuries consistent with assault of this nature. Something happened to her, and sure, maybe maybe Scully is willing to consider this could be a psychological blocking of what exactly happened, but she was attacked by somebody. Whether it was a ghost entity or a human being is a little besides the point. Scully just wants to find out what happened.
Yeah, obviously, because I think that the indication is that, and I don't see any reason to not believe the show when it tells us that she was attacked by someone or something.
Yeah,
and but the problem,
especially because we see it.
Well, right, we also see it, but I think that there's two problems with that. Number one is that the episode kind of either isn't interested in resolving that, or isn't, or forgets that it exists, right? And it's just a way for us to get into the actual story the episode wants to tell, which it also isn't very good at. But the other part of that is, Mulder does say the term entity rape, but it's never indicated that Scully doesn't outright say that her injuries are consistent with rape. She doesn't actually say that she was sexually assaulted and raped. She says that she was assaulted, but was she actually raped? The episode doesn't seem to make that clear.
Well, don't they mention at one point there was no semen found, for example?
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone isn't raped, right?
No, of course. What has happened is that I found it more of a case of, if they did find traces of semen, then they would not, number one, have more evidence to hope, I don't know where DNA evidence was at this point of time, but, let's this is a procedural show. It could be useful, and it also would more strongly prove what had happened to her. I guess.
Yeah, I can see that.
I guess it feels like for Scully, this is more of a what was Mulder's line in Erlenmeyer Flask? So much evidence and yet no evidence at all.
Yeah. I think that's right, and I think also too that like I said, I don't know how much we're actually supposed to take that seriously because the episode only uses that as a vehicle to get into this other story about this nursing home,
which is a shame.
No, go ahead.
Well, I really like the conversation when they're first interviewing the old man, and he has this one line like, "Oh, ever since this sexual harassment fad or whatever," and again, he's like I said, this is why I think the part of the episode that's a generational differences in the understanding of harassment. Again, this isn't a fad. This is more growing understanding of these things as harassment, of women realizing that they have rights and demanding them, rightfully so. I love what he says. He says at one point, let's say I, just said you were very pretty. Would that be assault? And we know that he has done more than just simply say to the nurse, "Oh, you're a pretty lady. Oh, darling." Which, our understanding is that wouldn't be okay as well, but that's not what he's doing. He's grabbing her ass. We assume that we are given the understanding that this is pretty much how he interacts with this woman every day, that every day she is going into a place where this guy is going to say sleazy shit to her. It's not just simply complimenting her beauty.
Right, because he is coming at this from a generation that believe that women's bodies are there for men to control and enjoy, and that I think is probably something that we don't need to dwell on too much because it's kind of understood at this point. But
Well,
I
not
also
by
think
our
that-
president, not by the president. But
Yeah, that's true. But I also think it's important to contextualize this as well, because I do think that one of the things that I like about this episode is that it treats the old people as people, with their own thoughts and desires and personalities. And I think that, in general, people infantilize old people, or they don't treat them as actual people. And yeah, certainly some of that is due to the fact that someone that has Alzheimer's, their personality is pretty much gone. They don't know it. Who is even talking to them? They're non-communicative. They're confused a lot of the time. But I think that it's an interesting juxtaposition, because it's okay to think that the old man is kind of a jerk. But not want him to be abused. And it's kind of like, I don't know what the episode is trying to say about any of that, though.
I mean, just like it's okay, it's one thing for this nurse to be kind of brusque, and maybe she's not, sweet and docile, but she also, even if she's going to be a killjoy, she doesn't deserve to be sexually assaulted either. I mean, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that goes without saying, but the episode doesn't really seem to be interested in arguing that whatsoever. I mean,
again, this is one of those episodes where somebody wrote half of it and then they passed it on to somebody else who finished it. That's what it feels like, one of those episodes.
Yeah, something got lost in the draft process that perhaps, I don't know if it was a worse episode before that or a better episode than before that. But, well, I think maybe the last thing to talk about with this episode before we move on to Aubrey, because holy shit, is what are we supposed to make of the kind of understated idea in this episode that part of the reason why all of this is happening is, I mean, we haven't even grappled with the ghost stuff, and we'll just leave that aside because I don't think there's any way that we can really deal with that satisfactorily. But what are we supposed to make about this kind of through line in the episode about budgetary cuts and, the fact that the old people are not being properly cared for because there's no budget for it? Meanwhile, this doctor seems very committed to them and he thinks he's doing a good job, but he's actually not. And then you've got the director of the institution who is, I don't think she's like an evil person, but she certainly is not very interested in being a good supervisor.
She's somebody who believes her own press releases, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, like I mean, she says several times, like, no abuse goes on in this place, and she has a very high opinion of this. And yes, I think the doctor, from what we see of them, seems to be a good, compassionate doctor. If he's not able to be living there residentially, if they don't have the proper medical staff that they need, well, keep in mind, we are only a few years removed from Reagan at this point. So, and Bush. So yeah, there probably were a lot of cuts to healthcare at this point. I think she is somebody who is attempting to make the best of a bad budgetary situation of certain financial realities while still trying to maintain a standard of care that actually does help these people. And I think she tends to look at the successes more than she looks at the failures.
I think so, and I also think that it's kind of interesting that the episode is filled with women that have very different motivations, personalities, do not necessarily like each other, but I don't think that, I mean, that maybe is the one saving grace of this episode, is that the women in this episode all do seem like people, which I guess is damning with faint praise, but you kind of got to take it where you can get it, I guess.
I mean, we get to see that old lady who was in everything around this time, so it's, that's always nice.
Yeah, that's always nice, and she gets to be kind of like crazy and nice, and I don't know, it's just, at the end of the day, you're right, like, it's not a great episode, it's got a lot of messy parts, and I don't know what point it was trying to make, but at this point in the show's run, even an episode like this is maybe okay, because we get Mulder and Scully together and they're entertaining even when the plot is shitty.
Yeah.
And we also get Mulder making a weird joke about porn, which is always great.
Yeah. Aw.
All right, well, let's talk about Aubrey then, because I think this is another episode that I'm not sure how I feel about. I don't think it's very good, but there's something compelling about it.
Yeah, it's... I can't say I saw the twist coming.
Yeah, I think that the twist is perhaps one of the most hokey things that the X-Files has done so far.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird because this week is kind of about like women in society in a way, isn't it? Because she is, she is a, by all accounts, successful, competent police professional, but she's in this secret relationship with her boss, and she gets pregnant, and he does not really take her seriously and does not really treat her as a person.
Yeah, I mean, he is really paternalistic with her. He's answering questions for her. He's trying to be protective of her and his own relationship and his own self at the same time, certainly. And I mean, I can appreciate how for the both of them, her pregnancy does become an issue. That is a thing.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a thing. And I think that, one of the things that the episode is trying to say perhaps is that, I mean, leaving aside all of the weird genetic memory stuff for a moment, because we'll get to that, but the episode starts out on a very strange note because Mulder's line about, what did he say? Like, I always find women with the name of BJ very interesting or something. And that is a weird line because, I mean, it's a joke and Mulder is charming and handsome and he can get away with it. But at the same time, I don't know if the episode is aware of the ways in which it is already painting women out to be objects of sexual
let me point out that this proves nothing, but a woman's name was the writer of the episode. So I almost wonder if some of that, I mean, all of that then to me feels a little intentional. In other words, they are portraying, I think there's a degree of this is what being a woman is like. These are comments that men will make. These are, this is the way that your boss will react to you, those kind of things. I do feel like it might be depicting neutrally with the intent of criticizing rather than just, this is a funny thing and this is how it should be. Like, I don't think the episode agrees with that. But that said, that is a very creepy line coming from Mulder. Mulder is somebody who likes his porn and likes looking at naked ladies, but is also going to be, he definitely puts a boundary between this is what I'm doing in the privacy of my own home and having these certain fantasies as distinct from actual women that he is interacting with on a day-to-day basis, right? We've never seen him make any lewd comments towards Scully herself. I mean, all of his porn jokes are more jokes on himself.
But isn't that, couldn't that be a criticism of it anyway, though? That Mulder, the Madonna whore complex thing, right?
Fair enough.
I think that there's an indication perhaps that Mulder does kind of subscribe to that theory a little bit. And
yeah, and I'm not sure. On the one hand, I can see that. On the other hand, he's also somebody who I don't see Mulder as having the bandwidth for a relationship, and I don't see many women as being able to really he's a challenging person to date, right? Let's leave it that. And so I think therefore perhaps Mulder's sexuality has been completely subsumed into his private porn stash, and that is that's his entire outlet for that. And so therefore he's not going to have sexual relationships with women, not because he wishes them to be Madonnas, but because that's not the right place for that, and I'm just going to be professional. I'm interacting with this women primarily and solely in many cases as colleagues, and so therefore sexuality is not appropriate to enter into this. I don't know. It's not. Yeah, but then he doesn't have a healthy sexuality, I think we can say.
Right, but then why does he keep making all of these weird porn jokes to Scully?
I think he's trying to freak out his sister a little bit. I think it's, like I said, the jokes for me come more as Mulder poking fun at himself for the fact that this is the entirety of his sex life or lack thereof, Will does kind of paint him as a loser. He's not somebody who is abiding by the cultural rules of what it means to be a cool dude. He's not getting a different chick every episode. He is not betting a lot of women. He is sitting at home jerking off by himself, and that's kind of a little sad, and I think that's really where the focus of his porn jokes usually, to me, seem to lie.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. But I guess also juxtaposing Mulder in this episode with the bald mustachioed police officer
played by John Locke.
Played by John Locke. I'm glad you picked up on that.
Oh, it's really fun because Lost was about 10 years after this. Those were the 10 years that Terry O'Quinn aged, right?
Yeah. He aged a lot in those 10 years. Although he looked better in Lost than he did in this.
Well,
episode.
yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I do think that it's weird to juxtapose Mulder in this episode with that character though, because, he doesn't get a lot of screen time. He's not portrayed as someone sympathetic. He's a little bit controlling. He's a little bit dismissive. We don't know what his pressures are. He's obviously married, having an affair with someone, and then she gets pregnant and he doesn't really know how to deal with it. And when she tells him sort of towards the end of the episode that she's thinking about having the baby, he gets very, controlling, let's say. And it is the case that I don't think we're supposed to think he's a great guy, but it seems like there's no indication in this episode whatsoever that any of the men in this episode are good guys. Mulder is not really coming across as a good guy. He's making weird jokes about her name to Scully. He's aggressively questioning her. The police officer is obviously not a great guy, at least in terms of his relationship with this woman BJ. And then also the other main male character of this episode is a literal serial killer.
Yeah, but I also don't. I think that the episode also makes the men out to be. I don't think it says they're bad or evil guys. I mean, Mulder we certainly like. The police.
Well, the serial killer is not a good guy.
Well, but at the same time, he does. I think we do need to take into consideration, as he does say, I served my time. They said I had some mental illnesses. I've been treated for those. And he has spent he is somebody who was a monster when he was very young. At this point, he is an old, dying man who just sits at home and watches TV. So he is not a good person, certainly, but he, as of the time of this episode, I think he has become defanged. Maybe.
Well, he has become defanged because he is an old man and incapable of actually coming through with his desires. But I don't think that I don't think he's cured. I don't think you cure someone who's a serial killer.
No, and he's not somebody I want to hang out with.
No. And I also think his interactions with Scully when they first go to his house are incredibly creepy and are intentionally creepy. I mean, he keeps calling her little sister.
Yeah.
He's leering at her. I think that his protestations of I did my time and I was cured and they gave me pills and everything's fine now. I mean, Scully is obviously extremely skeptical of that. But the episode is also telling us that Scully is right to be skeptical of this.
Yes. Again, everybody is on the dark side of gray on this, maybe, is what we would say about it.
Well, I don't know if you're going far enough. I think we would say that all of the men in this episode are on the gray side of dark, or whatever you want to say. I mean, I do think in some ways this is an episode about the ways in which men control women.
Yes. Oh, no, I would definitely agree with that. Very literally in the case of poor BJ, who is being possessed by her genetics. I mean, it makes no sense, obviously. And I mean, if the old man had died years before and she was possessed by his ghost, that would have been a better look. But anyway.
Well, we need to grapple with that plot line because the twist was a little bit weird, and I also think that I don't know to what degree I buy this. I'm about to say something that may come across as unbelievable or a little bit churlish when we are talking about the X-Files, but I think that having her be possessed by the genetic memory of her grandfather is a little bit too far even for this show.
I was going to say it's so our line of crazy is a frozen brain can control one's own brother, but a genetic memory causing you to kill is on the other side of that line. I think that's so far where we're figuring out our we can't take this shit thing.
I think so, because I don't think that bringing up Roland is an interesting comparison, because I think that Roland at least went some way towards justifying that or explaining that in terms of, because I don't really necessarily have a problem with the concept behind the twist, but the problem is that the episode doesn't do any groundwork to justify how this could be the case.
What it's trying to do, and see, this is something that I thought was thematically clearer than Excelsis Dei. This is an episode about becoming our parents, right? I mean, Mulder has that monologue about sunflower seeds and, why do I eat sunflower seeds? My dad ate sunflower seeds. Am I just eating sunflower seeds because my dad did? And when BJ is talking in the park, like, oh, my mother was so overprotective, I would never do that, and now I totally understand, and we all become our mothers, those kind of things. And
right.
When one is the descendant of evil, and I think we can use the term evil no matter where Coakley is in the events of this episode, when one's parents are evil and one becomes one's parents, what does that mean? Again, I think they take it in the most absurd and literal version of that whatsoever, and they have to do so much his saying, well, it skips a generation is the only way that they could preserve the twist whatsoever.
Well, right, it skips a generation, then also for some reason it doesn't start until she herself becomes pregnant, which... What?
I mean, I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that it turned out. I mean, the ages only vaguely lined up themselves. So let's say she's about 30 in this episode, and her father was, they're saying, well, the child would have been 50. So the father was killed in action. He had her at 20 and then died at 25 when she was 5 years old. Like, that kind of a thing is the implication of that. I frankly thought where it was going was that the police chief was actually the son, and so she was carrying his child rather than it being her own genetics. Again, I thought that it was the fetus which was evil and controlling her. That may have, and shockingly enough, I feel like that would have made a lot more sense plot-wise.
I think it would have. I mean, one of the things that I think is we may have to grapple with is the fact that this was 1995, and so the idea of genetics, the idea of DNA, while this was not a completely new idea, it also was becoming very sort of the time, right? And
I mean, I remember only a few years later talking about the gay gene, which people still fucking think exists, but...
Right, and also let's not forget this was around the same time of the O.J. Simpson trial, and DNA was a big part of that, and that was kind of one of the first big, huge court cases that hinged on that sort of evidence, and
also the Human Genome Project was going on, which the show has mentioned at times. So there is it's funny to see which episodes existed because of the trends at the time, because of the things people were thinking and talking about.
Right, because I think that's something the X-Files does, not all the time, but sometimes certainly. And I think that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, I actually sort of compare this episode in my mind a little bit to Ghost in the Machine from the first season, right? Like, that was another episode that was very of its time. It was very interested in concerns that people had in 1993 about computers. And it comes across as goofy and campy now. I don't think that this episode comes across as campy only because of the subject matter is a little bit gruesome, but it is the case that it feels like the show is trying to be of its time and trying to make some sort of point about a hot button issue and not really doing a good job of justifying it or understanding it even.
Well, again, like Excelsis Dei's treatment of sexual assault and the changing views around that. It fumbles it. This fumbles the genetics memory stuff, but...
Yeah. So, I mean, well, what do you make of Mrs. Thibodeau then? Because we haven't talked about her. Yeah, I mean, she's a great character, and I want her to be my grandmother. But aside from that, I think that in a certain sense, having Mulder... how the hell could he get detailed hospital admittance records from 50 years ago? I don't think we can do that now. Like, it seems frankly a little bit unbelievable that he was able to determine that she went into the hospital again 9 months after her attack. I just find that to be completely unbelievable, but we'll just have to go for it for the sake of the episode. But then, like, he has this bizarre theory about what is happening, and it turns out to be the case, but it's I don't know, it's just something about it that I don't know that I can really verbalize it well, but there are certain leaps of logic that Mulder engages in that I find believable or I don't have a problem with, and then some things like this episode where I just have to throw up my hands and go, what the fuck am I watching?
Well, I had one of the opposite problem during the section where they're trying to reconstruct, well, what was written on the skeleton, and I'm shouting at the TV, brother, it says brother, it's obviously brother, don't you see that? And they're just like, well, what word could it possibly be? Like, yeah.
And of course, having it be BJ come in and say, I know what it says, is supposed to be a foreshadowing of where the episode eventually goes, but
it's a silly episode, again, which maybe maybe it's true, it does undercut some of the gravitas of the subject matter. I don't know.
I mean, I think that the episode hangs together fairly well, except for the reveal that BJ is being controlled by the genetic memory of her serial killer grandfather. Like, that's the one part of the episode that doesn't track for me. But I think that in terms of the execution of what it's trying to say about women, I think it does a good job. And I also think it's really, really creepy.
And I understood the plot. Again, I didn't understand quite the plot of Excelsis Dei. I have to, with Aubrey, I have to accept that genetic memory can do this. But once you accept that bit of technobabble, the episode makes sense.
I think technobabble is actually a perfect name for it, because I was kind of thinking about that in that term as well. Like, this is, in effect, the X-Files version of Star Trek technobabble, and you either have to go with it or you just throw up your hands, and you're never going to be able to grapple with this episode on any level other than incredulity, I think. Yeah.
But, and maybe if this were one of the first episodes I was watching, I would have thrown up my hands. I think by this point, I'm going with it. Okay, genetic memory makes you a serial killer. Sure.
I mean, they do get to throw around young, so that's great, I guess. But the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this episode up is we haven't talked at all about the connection between Mulder and these FBI agents that were murdered 50 years ago. And I think on one level, obviously there's not too much to say, because it doesn't really have anything to do with the thematic resonances of this episode, but it does, I think, say something about the ways in which the show is interested in using the history of the FBI.
Yeah.
Because
it's, I mean, this reminds me of, it's the very first X-File made by J. Edgar Hoover. What episode was that even? I don't remember.
That was Shapes.
That was Shapes. Okay. And I think I said, like, this is kind of stupid because of all, you would think that would be a very significant case, and it's this. It would have made more sense if Roswell had been the first X-File.
Right.
For example, here, I mean, there is a little work done where he's saying, they used to, people used to think psychological profiling was a lot of hooey, and, now people think paranormal stuff is a lot of hooey. Who knows where in 40 years we're going to be? And obviously, Mulder is making it his work to get paranormal stuff accepted as truth in the world. I feel like they could have done more with that theme. I would have liked to have seen more, because there is a lot of depth and resonance that could be plumbed that they just don't, because they have to move on to other things.
I think so, and I also think that the show, one of the things that I kind of like about that, though, is that the show never states or never reminds us that the way that Mulder got started was in the behavioral sciences unit, and he was himself. He is in this position now of working on the X-Files in an official FBI capacity because of the work that these two dead FBI agents did 50 years ago. And that itself is kind of a nice closed circle in a way.
Yeah. I thought it was a good time. Like I said, these 2 episodes were at least fun. This is a fun show when it's working.
I'm glad you're saying that, because I think that you were not saying that last season.
No, it's I mean, I think part of that is just a simple, the writers are getting better at knowing the characters. Duchovny and Anderson are getting better at understanding who these characters are. I'm getting more used to it. And also, I mean, what season 2 has leveled up in terms of what they're doing with the overarching plot, where they're taking these characters. Although I will say, I thought it was a slight missed opportunity, because we're eventually going to have to deal with the shot that we saw of Scully pregnant in the alien ship. And I thought that this episode was going to begin with that a little bit, because again, here's pregnancy. This is a perfect opportunity to to do that, especially with Scully recognizing, number one, that they're having an affair, and that BJ is pregnant and all of that. Obviously, she is a doctor with women's intuition, but it seemed like
we didn't even mention that part of the episode, which I found to be I don't know. I found it offensive on behalf of women. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I do think that it was a little.
I mean, it is very obvious based on their interactions, even in the few minutes, that yes, there is something going on between the two of them, and it's not a leap for a doctor who is very insightful like Scully to, make a very educated guess and risk being right. I mean, it does seem like, when she asked, "Oh, when you're pregnant too," it's a partial moonshot, but not out of left field.
Yeah, but what turns it into a little bit of a cliche for me is that line about, "Oh, well, it's women's intuition."
I mean, frankly, give Mulder that. Oh, what is that? Women's intuition? No, it's incredibly obvious. He was guiding her. He answered the question for her. She's throwing up, and she's very upset about something. Either she's got food poisoning or something else is happening. It's
right.
But who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, and I think that's all we can say about these episodes. Not great, but entertaining, and the show is working for you. I'm happy the show is working for you, and I think that even in episodes that are not the best, you can still get something out of them. So,
well, I mean, as long as they're not 3.
Yeah. Well, I think you could make an argument that maybe the show doesn't necessarily work when Mulder and Scully are apart.
But I think that is very fair to say. Again, one of the reasons I really didn't like 3 was because Mulder was very uninteresting, and there wasn't at least the two of them. Again, at the very least, put Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny in a room, and they'll be fun to watch.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's really what it comes down to, is that the X-Files at its worst. If you have Mulder and Scully together, you just like watching these characters have a good time together, and that's really what it comes down to, and that's what powers you through some of the worst episodes of the show.
Yeah, at times it's a Mulder and Scully delivery system, and that's great.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that's it for Excelsis Dei and Aubrey. If you have any thoughts on either of these episodes, please go to tuninginshow.com and leave a comment. You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/truckaboutshow, which also supports our other long-running podcast, Truckabout. 2 days ago, we released our episode on the Star Trek Voyager episodes Threshold and Meld. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we are there. Tuning In Show is our username in all those places. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review for tuning in. It is the best way for new people to find the show.
The best.
The best. The biggest,
but the
best, the most beautiful.
You know who the best are? You, the listeners.
That is always true. Next week, we're going to be talking about the episodes Irresistible and Da Hand die Werklitz.
Mac, why do you...